Welcome to another edition of Windsor Teaches Latin Language. Today we're going to be discussing plural subjects and objects, nominative and accusative. What shapes and forms and functions can you expect these types of words to have? First of all, before we do anything else, let's just get a little bit more information on subject and object, nominative and accusative, transitive, intransitive, all of this sort of stuff. In Latin, most of the verbs we need to know are transitive, with the exception of a few. This means that most sentences will require someone or something doing the action and someone or something having the action done to them. So transitive verbs require a subject, someone doing the action, and someone having the action done to them. For more information on the transitive and intransitive, please check out my subjects and objects singular video. So let's look at a sentence as an example. The master has a slave. Obviously, the tragic context of slave ownership in Rome, the civilization that we love and love to study and we find fascinating, obviously has this tragic situation of slavery going on in the background. The Roman Empire was built on slave labor. So let's look at this sentence here. So the master is the subject of that sentence. He is the person or thing performing the action. Has is the verb of that sentence. It is the action. And slave is the object of that sentence. It is having the action done to them. So the master is doing the having, whereas the slave is being owned. Therefore, the master is the subject of the sentence, and the slave is the object of the sentence, and has is the action of the sentence. So in linguistic terms, in Latin, the master would be in the nominative case and the slave in the accusative case. So let's now see what this looks like in Latin. So the master has the slave in Latin would be Dominus servum habet. So the dominus would be the subject of that sentence. Habet would be the verb of that sentence. And servum would be the object of that sentence. That means that in Latin, dominus would be in the nominative case, servum would be in the accusative case. This is a departure from English word order, as we always say our subject first, then our verb, and then our object towards the end. We say the master has the slave, subject, verb, object. However, in Latin, that word order is flipped. The subject goes first, and then the object being acted upon, and then the verb. So let's briefly review what we've been told already. The master has a slave is an example of a singular phrase. The master and slave are both singular. The master would be the subject, has would be the verb, and slave would be the object. However, if we were to turn both of the parties involved into plural, we would end up with the masters have slaves. In English, when we make something plural, we put an S on the end. And so the masters are still the object of the sentence. Have, which has changed slightly, is still the verb of the sentence, and slaves are still the object of the sentence, except the only nuance here is that there is now more than one master and more than one slave. Okay, so the master is highlighted in blue because it is the subject and therefore nominative. The slave is highlighted in red because it is the object and therefore accusative, and has is in purple. Let's see how this looks in Latin. Dominus servum habet. So in the singular, dominus is master, servum the object, and habet is the verb. The masters have slaves, which change into domini servos habent. So there are some changes here. We know that Latin is an inflective language, and so its endings are going to change depending on its use in the sentence. So nouns will change their endings depending on what case they're in, and if they're singular and plural. And as a result, you might also have noticed another difference, that the ending of the verb has changed. When the participants in the sentence are singular or plural, that means that also the verb ending has to change to reflect that difference. So now we know that the shapes of the nouns and verbs are going to change depending on a few different things, such as how many of the subject or object are being spoken about, what role it plays in the sentence, and also the verb will change depending on how many. So if we're talking about a singular subject, it will usually have a T ending. If we're talking about a plural, it will change to an NT ending. So what sort of endings can we expect from plural nouns in the main three declensions, first, second, and third, respectively? Well, say we're using puella, dominus, and mercato as our example words in the first, second, and third declensions, respectively. If the girls in the plural are the nominative, they're the subjects of the sentence, we would say use the word puelai. If they are the objects of the sentence, they would be puelas. If you have more than one master and they are the subjects of the sentence, the people doing the action, we would say domini. If the masters are the objects of the sentence, having the action performed on them, they would be dominos. And finally, if you have a merchant or more than one merchant and they are the subjects of the sentence, we'd say mercatores. And also in the accusative, possibly confusingly, if they are the objects of the sentence, then we would say mercatores as well, which is good because there's less information to remember, but also a little bit more tricky as we have to tell by context if nominative or accusative are being used in the plural third declension. So we know what the forms might look like from the plural, nominative and accusative, subject and object for the main 3 declensions of nouns. But we also mentioned the fact that verbs have the tendency to change as well on the same basis. And say we're talking about verbs. Now, in the blue highlighted here are what the endings would be for I, you singular, or he, she, or it performing the action. Obviously, all of these are singular, and so I've given them a different section. And we can expect an O, an S, and a T ending on the end of those verbs respectively. In the red part of the grid here, we have the plural endings for nouns. We, you plural, and they are all plural in their nature, and they will have endings mus, tis, and unt on any verb in the plural present tense. So this is for the present tense only. Other tenses are going to have their own endings on this basis as well. Let's just keep it for present tense for the sake of this video. Okay, so let's get on to a bit of practice using the information from this video. Step 1, we're going to choose the correct word from the brackets and put it into the gap. And step 2 is we're going to translate the sentence. I've mixed in some singular subjects and objects as well, so it'd be helpful to look at my singular subjects and objects video before you begin. How are we going to decide which of these words is going to go in the gap? Well, we're going to look at 2 key pieces of information. We're going to look at the verb, that's the noun that starts the sentence, and we're going to decide if it is singular or plural, and that will inform us what sort of verb we need to put in that gap. Sometimes, however, we are missing the first noun of the sentence, and so in those cases we're going to look at the verb and we're going to decide what sort of subject, singular or plural, would fit best in that gap. Thank you very much for listening to my video. I hope you tune in for the next episode.